coming up today on the Nick Craig Show. For years, I've been warning about the ongoing civil war within the Democrat Party. It remains ongoing, and now even left-wing media is talking about it. I'll have all the details coming up. And a good Tuesday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget, you can also take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple and completely free to do. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app or visit the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Our show notes available, as always, over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. For those that have been longtime listeners of the program, one of the recurring things that I have talked about is the ongoing war within the Democrat Party. There is a lot of different factions. There's a lot of different agendas. There's a lot of different viewpoints in the Democrat Party currently. And this, behind the scenes, for the most part, has been a big problem. In various instances, we have seen some of these issues, some of these disagreements start boiling to the surface. And I would say over the last year to two, there have been more examples of these internal conflicts within the Democrat Party that are getting out and being public. Now, that's not to say that there has not always been disagreement within the Democrat Party or even the Republican Party. Dissension and disagreement within the party structure, within the party system, is not anything new. I'm not bringing you any breaking news here on the Nick Craig Show. This has happened. For the most part, though, the Democrats specifically have been very good at keeping these issues internal. They do not bleed out into the public light. They do not become a big story. And that's something that the Democrat Party, to their credit, has been very good at in years past. They consistently shuffle around candidates, sideline individuals, and for the most part, yes, you of course have a very small vocal minority of people on the left that protest and yell and scream and, self-immolate, light themselves on fire in front of buildings, just to protest and, normal things that you would expect. But for the most part, it stays out of the public light. That is beginning to crack. The dam that has been holding all of this back is starting to show some cracks and some water is starting to flow through. So over the weekend, I had the TV on, wasn't watching it, but it was on in the background with all the four cable news, with the four major cable news networks. And every once in a while, I'd walk by and glance and just see what was being talked about. And at one point, I walked by and I saw this headline on CNN, or the lower third on CNN, and I caught myself. I double-taked and looked at it again, and it was exactly what I have been talking about with this internal struggle within the Democrat Party. So I quickly grabbed the remote to turn up the volume so I could hear what was going on, and CNN was having a full-on, 45-minute panel discussion on an article that they published over the weekend with the headline, "Bernie Blowback," talking about Bernie Sanders. How Sanders' primary endorsements have sparked a Democratic midterm war. It's great to be right. I've been saying this for years. This is something that I've been following and tracking very closely behind the scenes for quite some time, and it has now gotten to the point where CNN is running a piece on it, where they are doing a long-form program. They had a bunch of their different experts and analysts on the show over the weekend talking about it, and this is now coming out into the public. Now, before we get into some of the details in this article and some of the concerns from the authors in this piece and from the Democratic apparatus, it's not necessarily a surprise that CNN is publishing this. one of the things that is very well known, if you are on the right side of the political aisle, is that the vast majority of the left-wing media in our country, which is almost all of mainstream media, they get their talking points. Now, they pretend to be independent. They pretend that they have come up with these grandiose thoughts. They pretend that they have this ability to really draw down and do some hardcore analysis on a situation and bring that analysis to you, the viewer. In reality, it is the Democratic Party, the DNC, that in large part gives them their talking points. And this has been proven with a variety of different collages and montages that have been made over the years, where all of the cable news networks, all of the evening news programs on the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, all talk about a story in a very similar way. The intro is very similar. The framing is very similar. It is obvious that somebody, some group, some organization, whether that be the Democrat Party itself or groups closely aligned with the Democrat Party, get these talking points out there. They say, hey guys, here's the structure. Here's the script. Here are some of the words that you need to use to really hammer this point home, to really make sure that this stuff is playing out the way that it's supposed to, the way that we want it to play out. And so when you start, and now that we've seen CNN publish this headline about Bernie Sanders and the internal strife within the Democrat Party, it is, from my just gut reaction and analysis to this, is that the internal pressure has risen to such a level. There's so much internal pressure. There's so much heat internally that the only way to release some of that is to leak this out, to get this out on and get it published over at CNN. It's like an emergency release valve that you'd have on like a hot water heater or something like that. That's seemingly what is going on from my analysis of this situation. The struggle is continuing. The frustration is building. You've got the Bernie Sanders and the quote-unquote anti-establishment Democrats that continually find themselves very frustrated with their party apparatus. And let's be honest, for good reason, because the Democrat Party is incredibly rigged. The superdelegate process, the way in which the party operates, it is truly not the voters of the Democrat Party that get to decide who their candidates are. Don't take my word for it. Go back and take a look at the process that unfolded ahead of the 2024 presidential election. Joe Biden is the guy, runs around the country, quote unquote, winning all of these primaries, has a disastrous debate performance in July of 2024, decides that he is going to hang up his hat over after all these phenomenal years of public service. And lo and behold, Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, who not a single Democrat voted for to be their presidential nominee, ends up at the top of the ticket. And so if you are a Bernie Sanders type, if you're an AOC type, if you're a Rashida Tlaib type that is a registered Democrat, is elected as a Democrat. Bernie Sanders was elected as a Democrat. He's an independent now, but obviously way more closely aligned to the Democrat Party than anything else. If you're one of these people, you're livid as to what you're seeing going on. You've just watched the Democrat establishment destroy Graham Plattner. We just saw this over the last couple of weeks. A guy that was building an incredible amount of enthusiasm from far left progressive radicals in the state of Maine, who, no question about it, was in that position and forced to drop out of the race, in large part because the Democrat Party likely had something to do with planting stories, no pun intended, about him in mainstream media. The pressure, the heat got a little too much, and he decided just a couple of weeks ago, within the last 2 weeks, that he was dropping out of that race. And once again, voters in the state of Maine, Democrats who voted for Graham Plattner in the primary back in early June, those voters will not, and I repeat myself, will not have a say as to who their general election candidate will be that will face off against Susan Collins in the state of Maine. This is becoming a very common practice within the Democrat Party. And the internal strife, the internal conflict is rising, from my estimation, to all-time highs, and we could see a public blowout here if things don't change pretty quickly. I truly believe that. There's only so much of this infighting. There's only so much of this internal pressure that an organization or an entity like the Democrat Party can take before the whole thing explodes in front of our very eyes. One of the things I have talked about for years is this internal strife, this internal conflict within the Democrat Party. You may have heard me describe it as the internal or the ongoing civil war, as these much more active, much more engaged, far left-wing progressives try and take over the Democrat Party, try and assume power from individuals like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic National Committee. These groups are not necessarily huge in size, but they are very vocal, they are very engaged, they are very involved, and they are the loud voice in the room, even though they absolutely fit the bill of the vocal minority. And so this has been something that the Democrat Party really has been dealing with since 2016. I mean, you can go back to the 2016 presidential primary for the Democrat Party, where Bernie Sanders has all the enthusiasm, all the support, specifically with young people, which was something that Trump was bringing to the equation. A lot of younger individuals, particularly younger men, really latched on to what Donald Trump was talking about in 2016. The Democrats had a candidate that could counteract that in some respects in Bernie Sanders, who had the progressive wing of the party, the more left-wing individuals really riled up, really engaged, really involved. And what happened? The Democratic National Committee, using their superdelegate process, rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders. This was a favor to Hillary Clinton, who stepped aside in 2008 because Barack Obama came onto the scene. She was supposed to be the presidential nominee in 2008. Obama was a much more charismatic, much more electable individual, obviously, as we saw. And so she took a back seat and was promised the gig in 2016. And in fact, the Democrat Party, which she, of course, is a member of the establishment wing of, came through on their promise. They made sure that Hillary Clinton was their nominee. Now, obviously, that was a major misstep. Clinton ran an awful campaign and got annihilated by Donald Trump on a cold November night in November of 2016. And so that was the first time that Bernie Sanders saw the backseat. We then flash forward to 2020. Once again, enthusiasm, support, a lot of engaged younger voters, those that are willing to go out and actually help get a candidate elected. Once again, Bernie Sanders shown the sideline. And then the situation in 2024, in which not a single Democrat across the United States had the ability to vote for Kamala Harris in a primary election, yet she becomes their presidential nominee. And so with all of these different tales, with all of these different circumstances that have unfolded over the last decade, it's no surprise to me that those within the Democrat Party, the much more, again, it's important to note, the much more engaged, much more progressive, much more left-wing individuals within that party are livid. They've said, what the hell is going on here? We're the ones that are out. We're the ones that are involved. We're the ones that are engaged, and we can't get any of our candidates across the finish line. And as soon as we do, like somebody like a Graham Plattner in Maine, the Democrat Party obviously places a story in mainstream media about some of Graham Plattner's past issues dealing with sexual abuse and assault and some of his other problems, and they literally run him out of the race. And so it leads us to this article over at CNN Politics that ran over the weekend. The Bernie blowback, how Sanders' primary endorsements have sparked a Democratic midterm war. Going through some of the details in the article. Senator Bernie Sanders had just announced his intent to unseat a sitting House Democrat, this time a member of the Congressional Black Caucus from North Carolina, when Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who is the House Minority Leader, the leader of the Democrat Party in the United States House, decided it was time to confront Sanders himself. The House Democratic leader warned Sanders against meddling in House primaries, particularly one involving a black Democrat in such a critical midterm election year, according to 3 Democrats familiar with the conversation. Representative Greg Meeks of New York, a Democrat and a Hakeem Jeffries ally who was on this phone call and spoke to CNN, quote, "He seemed to not care." Well, of course, he seemed to not care. The Democrat Party has treated Bernie Sanders terribly over the last decade. This is a guy that very obviously had the enthusiasm, had the support to probably win a Democrat primary if the DNC itself didn't play in its own primaries and rig it against Sanders. Now, the Democrat Party had a good reason for doing so. They believe that Bernie Sanders, and I tend to agree with them, is unelectable on the national stage. This, a reject hippie from the state of Vermont that is been in public service as a so-called elected official for 60 years is not compelling to the American people. His radical socialist ideas are not palatable by the vast majority of the American people. And so the Democrat Party knows this. They knew this about Graham Plattner in Maine as well. And so they have consistently attempted to sideline, and to their credit, have been successful with doing that with somebody like a Bernie Sanders. So Hakeem Jeffries calls up old Senator Sanders and says, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing here? Why are you going after a Democrat in the state of North Carolina that's got a primary election?" And as Representative Greg Meeks told CNN, he seemed not to care. Well, no, duh. Of course he didn't care. This party has treated him terribly. He's going to now, once again, bend over backwards and cave to the Democrat Party. He did that in 2016, hoping that it would buy him some favor in years moving forward, and it obviously hasn't, because the Democrat Party still refuses to put Bernie Sanders in the limelight. He seemed not to care, Representative Greg Meeks of New York, who was on the call, said of Sanders, recalling the previously underreported phone call. The intervention from those powerful Washington Democrats came just before incumbent Representative Valerie Foushee edged out her challenger Nita Alma in the March primary. Asked recently to describe the conversation, Jeffries would say only, "It was honest." The article continues by saying, heading into the midterms, Sanders has perhaps never been more powerful in Democratic politics. But the Vermont Independent is now at the center of a brewing party civil war that could sway the fate of key midterm seats with control of Congress on the line. You don't understand how excited I was to see this conversation playing out on CNN over the weekend. And when I went and read this article and saw this line, a brewing party civil war. I have been talking about this for the better part of 5 or 6 years. And to see these words in a CNN article, to see this conversation taking place on CNN over the weekend brought such a smile to my face. I have been calling this. I've been keeping such a close eye on this, and it is obvious to me now that the Democrat Party believes they have no other option but to now attack Bernie Sanders using their friends in the mainstream media. I'll have more in this article coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to thank Melissa Gott and the amazing team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued financial support of the Nick Craig Show, giving me the ability and the opportunity to be with you here each and every weekday. And remind you, when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group right here in Wilmington. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com, a great website, a blog where you can read about a variety of different legal matters. You can read about all of the attorneys, Melissa Gott and all of her team, and the work that they have done in their profession. All of that online, lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or online, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. We'll get back to this CNN piece, plus Bernie Sanders responding at a rally over the weekend as he was in Michigan talking about the Democrat Party. Oh boy, this ought to be real interesting as we approach November. As the Nick Craig Show continues streaming live this morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Tuesday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for spending some time here today. Don't forget you can get access to our daily show notes and support the program over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Access to our monthly hangout that's coming up next week. Looking forward to chatting with everybody over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. All right, we're talking about this very fascinating piece that ran over at CNN over the weekend. Bernie blowback, how Bernie Sanders' primary endorsements have sparked a Democratic midterm war, with CNN describing a, quote, brewing party civil war that could sway the fate of key midterm seats with control of Congress on the line, something I've been talking about 5, 6, 7 years on a variety of different media platforms. Back to the article over at CNN, it goes on to say, at the heart of the debate whether to nominate candidates more friendly to the party's establishment and seen as wooing swing voters, or to pick Democratic socialists or further left progressives who can energize a party base but who risks alienating independents. See, that's the key. That's always been the issue. Just this election cycle, CNN writes, Sanders has endorsed more than 90 candidates, helping defeat House incumbents in New York City and Colorado. Of the 60 candidates who have had their elections already, 42 have won their races, including 10 out of 16 federal candidates, according to the Sanders team. But in Washington, the swamp, senior Democrats argue Sanders is forcing them to divert precious cash to primaries instead of spending to fight the GOP in November. Sanders and his political operation are under new scrutiny over his backing of the now disgraced former candidate Graham Plattner in Maine's Senate race, even after the New York Times reported on allegations of Plattner's unsettling behavior. That's what CNN writes. Now, he was abusing women. Towards women, Sanders stood by Plattner saying there are no saints in the United States Senate. It wasn't until CNN and Politico reported Plattner was accused of rape, an allegation he denies, that Sanders pulled his endorsement. According to Democrat Representative Hillary Schlotton of Michigan, Bernie has endorsed some flawed candidates recently. I think it's really important to look at the judgment that has been exercised. The Graham Plattner situation should be a huge warning sign to a lot of voters about what the stamp of approval might mean. Let me make sure you're understanding what's going on here. You have Democrats speaking on the record, members of Congress speaking on the record with their names, actively going after Bernie Sanders at CNN. This is a call coming from inside the House. The Democrat Party and all of its various groups and all of the apparatus that it is planting, no pun intended, this story at CNN, is making this story available to the cable news network. The internal pressure has gotten so extreme, has gotten so severe, that they are now taking to the media, using their allies in the mainstream media to try and once again knock Bernie Sanders down a couple of pegs. And it will probably be successful. The article goes on to say the clash between Sanders and the party establishment is coming to a head in the critical battleground state of Michigan, where he's rallying this weekend. I've got a clip of that coming up. Sanders is campaigning with Senate candidate Abdul El-Sayed and a House candidate by the name of William Lawrence, who Congressional Black Caucus members are pushing to defeat after he decried black political leaders in 2024 comments. Sanders was unapologetic when asked whether he's making it harder for Democrats to win in November. No, the 84-year-old said, I think, in fact, the candidates we are supporting are candidates who are representing working people. And I think it's time, long overdue, for the Democrat Party to stop worrying about their wealthy campaign funders and start worrying about the needs of working people. This is not anything new for Bernie Sanders, this kind of narrative, this kind of messaging. This is very similar to what you saw leading up to the 2016 primary, very similar to what you saw in 2020 and what you've seen over the last 2 years as him and his best friend Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the former bartender, have been flying around the United States in their private jet on their, what is it called, the Fight the Oligarchy or Eat the Oligarchy tour, as they fly around on a private chartered plane. Bernie Sanders with his, what does he have, 4 houses, including a couple of lake houses. You know, eat the rich. We hate rich people. We hate successful people. But hey, I'm going to spend the weekend over at one of my various multi-million-dollar lake houses. Typical for a Democrat, typical for a socialist. Rules for thee, but not for me. And so at the campaign events, one of the campaign events that took place this weekend, Bernie Sanders called out this Democrat leadership again, talking about this, again, problem that he has with the Democrat Party. Take a listen.
And I'll tell you what else people are sick and tired of. They are sick and tired of wealthy campaign contributors determining who the candidates of the Democratic Party will be. So I say to the Democratic leadership, get your super PACs out of these primaries and let the people decide who their candidate will be. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you, change is coming.
So there's a little bit of everybody's favorite independent senator from the state of Vermont, the great Bernard Sanders, talking about the Democrat Party. Time to get your super PACs out of these primaries, calling out Democratic leadership for backing candidates that are more mainstream that they know can win. Brothers and sisters, giving a church sermon, I guess, somewhere in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Let me tell you, change is coming. Major problems within the Democrat Party. All right, back to the CNN piece. All roads lead to Michigan. Michigan is the heart of the Democrats' identity crisis. In the Senate, Sanders has backed El-Sayed, whose pursuit of Medicare for all and criticism of Israel and the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee have made him a darling for the progressive left. The party establishment is coalescing behind Representative Haley Stevens, a more moderate Democrat from the Detroit area, who is pitching herself as more electable against a likely GOP nominee for former Representative Mike Rogers. With the race seen as neck and neck ahead of the August the 4th primary, Democrats in Washington and Michigan are particularly nervous about El-Sayed. One of the people is retiring Senator Gray Peters, who currently holds the seat. Peters was expected to stay neutral in the race, but decided last week to endorse Stevens, one person familiar with the discussion told CNN. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who has made no secret about his preference for Stevens to win the primary, demurred when asked by CNN whether he had any issues with Sanders stumping for the opposition. Schumer told CNN, quote, Democrats have always come up with candidates that fit their states. We will do that in Michigan. We will beat the Republican, and we will take back the Senate. Sanders and the progressive wing, however, insist that El-Sayed improves the party's chances of winning the seat among a voting base that is retreating from the establishment Democrat politics. And Sanders' allies argue he can energize longtime Democrats and new voters. Representative Ro Khanna, everybody's favorite member of Congress from California, said, there's the Pope, then there's Obama, then there's Bernie. Wow. What a group of characters there. The Pope, Barack Obama, savior of the Democrat Party, and then Bernie Sanders, who, by the way, is not even a Democrat at this point. He is a registered independent. He is not a Democrat elected in the United States Senate. Now, he more closely aligns, no surprise, with the Democrat Party. He's not by any stretch a conservative or a Republican, but he's not even a sitting Democrat. This is turning into an unmitigated disaster for the Democrat Party, an unmitigated disaster for the DNC and the establishment Democrat Party. There's no other way to describe it but a complete free fall for the Democrats. They have very little options, very few ways to go forward. We are rounding out the conversation on a fascinating piece over at CNN over the weekend called Bernie Blowback, talking about how Bernie Sanders and the establishment Democrat Party, who have been going at it privately behind the scenes in large part over the last decade. Some of that has boiled to the surface. We saw it in 2016 when Sanders was sidelined for everybody's favorite Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, who would then go on to lose to Donald Trump. We saw it in 2020 when, once again, Senator Sanders sidelined so that everybody's favorite president, Joe Biden would become the nominee. And then in 2024, Joe Biden ran in the primary and then decided to drop out of the race. And not a single Democrat had the ability to vote for who the replacement was going to be. It would go on to be one of the more unlikable candidates in modern American politics. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump would win 7 of 7 swing states and is currently serving as the 47th president of the United States of America. So this didn't just happen yesterday. Bernie Sanders didn't just wake up on the wrong side of the bed yesterday and determine that the Democrat Party is his enemy. This has been 10 years, if not more, in the making. It's been a slow build. I am sure behind the scenes, there's been a lot more that has gone on. I've been keeping an eye on some of that. And now we are seeing it finally reach a point where the Democrat Party itself is staging an article in CNN with elected members of Congress going after Bernie Sanders in this piece over at CNN. Back to the article. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC from New York, somebody who is close to Sanders, has become a liberal kingmaker in her own right. Although she didn't endorse Planter, she insisted that Al Said, the far-left Democrat Senate candidate in the state of Michigan, is a profoundly strong candidate. When AOC was asked, "I don't think people have really made the forceful case outside of his identity, to be honest with you, and I don't accept that." Ocasio-Cortez asked whether she meant Al Said's Muslim identity. The progressive congresswoman said, "Yeah." She went on to say, "Keep it to the issue if we want to say what specifically it is, but I don't ascribe to the idea that a Muslim can't win, that a woman can't win, that a white person can't win. I don't ascribe to these ideas." But Sanders' critics say that he is trying to shift the party in a direction that most voters will reject outside of very liberal districts where members of the Democratic Socialists of America have won primaries. That's the DSA. Representative Josh Gottheimer, a centrist and pro-Israel Democrat from New Jersey, said, quote, "The DSA, which Bernie is a part of, is trying to hijack the Democrat Party. And what you're seeing is people don't want that. The Democratic Party wants to be the Democratic Party, and he's trying to use the Democratic Party as a vessel for socialism, and people don't want socialism." Truer words have never been spoken, I don't know, by anybody. CNN writes, Sanders is not a member of the DSA, though he identifies as a Democratic Socialist, and the group supported his 2016 and 2020 presidential campaign. So great news there for the state. Great news there from CNN. Glad they made that point. Down the ballot in Michigan, party leaders are increasingly anxious that Lawrence is surging in a three-way primary for one of the congressional seats in that state. They worry that the Sanders-backed candidate could cost them a must-win seat held by a swing district Republican known as Representative Tom Barrett. The 35-year-old Democratic Socialist and climate change activist is under fire from senior black Democrats, including Hakeem Jeffries and Representative Meeks, for remarks published last week by the Huffington Post in which he said that black political leaders defang the white left. Lawrence, in an interview Friday with CNN, apologized for the remarks, which his allies argued are a misrepresentation of a longer discussion of racial justice within the black activist community. Lawrence told CNN, "I understand why people would be concerned to read that article because it doesn't reflect who I am and my values. I spoke poorly and I regret the way that I made my point." He said he particularly regrets the use of the phrase "the white left," which he said misrepresents my values and commitments. Still, the blowback has been swift. Jeffries called the comments deeply disturbing. The Congressional Black Caucus political arm is funding ads against him, and Michigan Senator Elise Slotkin, who typically stays neutral in her state's primaries, recently weighed in on behalf of his competitors, former Navy SEAL Matt Massam, for her old House seat. Lawrence is scheduled to join and was at one of the weekend stops with Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the state of Michigan. Meeks told CNN, quote, "We're going to beat him. We're going to win the election, and I think African Americans are going to turn out just for that." He said he saw Lawrence's remarks as a criticism specifically aimed at the Black Caucus, which includes longtime lawmakers active in fighting civil rights, according to CNN. One Sanders ally in response to this article told CNN that the Vermont Independent is supporting, quote, "many black progressive candidates across the country this year," adding, "Instead of constantly attacking progressive candidates, I don't understand why the Black Caucus hasn't joined him in supporting great candidates like Justin Pearson in Tennessee and Donovan McKinley in Michigan." Pearson is running for an open seat redrawn for Republican advantage, and McKinley, who appeared at Sanders' rally Saturday in Detroit, is challenging incumbent Representative Sheree Thander. Lawrence, for his part, has reached out for a conversation with the congressional black leaders, but the lawmakers declined, saying that they would speak to him after the primary, according to a person familiar with the exchange. Holy smokes. Not what I was expecting to wake up and see Saturday morning. Not the conversation that I was expecting to see over at CNN. Now, for the vast majority of you listening to me as I just read through that article, nothing that I just read through, nothing that was published here by CNN is new. I've talked about this. Many of the other shows and podcasts that you listen to have likely talked about this issue. This is not a new idea. This is something that there's been a lot of political analysis done on. And it really boils down to one simple thing that CNN wrote in their article. These far-left progressive Democrats, whether they're DSA members or not, kind of irrelevant, they are not palatable to the vast majority of the American people. Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, the Black Caucus, everybody within Democratic politics, for the most part, knows that that's the case. They know that these candidates, when tested on the national stage, when having to run statewide elections, cannot win because moderate Democrats and independents reject these crazy radical ideas. The Democrat Party knows this. Conservatives and Republicans know this. It's the Bernie Sanders, the AOC, and this far left wing that I think in large part is a little bit hypnotized by their thoughts that, we do well in primaries, therefore we win general elections. And so this is a problem that's going to continue. This is not going anywhere. The only reason that this article popped up in CNN over the weekend, and I feel very confident saying this, is because the Democrat Party placed it there. The benefit that the Democrats have is that they control the mainstream media in the United States. They control the messaging, they control the narratives, they control the talking points. And so when they want to go on assault against Bernie Sanders, which is what they're doing right now, they don't have to do it themselves. Chuck Schumer doesn't have to host a press conference. Hakeem Jeffries doesn't have to host a press conference. They can get this story and many others that we're likely to see in the months to come placed in outlets like CNN and put the Democrats, these far left-wing Democrats and socialists, on their heels. And so this is going to be fascinating to watch as this civil war within the Democrat Party does in fact continue in these ever pivotal midterm elections coming up a little bit later on this year. I cannot tell you, again, how excited's not the right word to use, but the smile that was on my face when I was reading through this article over the weekend and watching this conversation play out on CNN. This is everything that I have been talking about. And it is amazing that this has been kept behind the scenes for the most part for so long. And it seems like now finally the dam is breaking and the Democrats, they've got a big problem on their hands because this is not an easy solution. As I've already noted, these more far left progressive candidates and their volunteers are hyper engaged. They are hyper involved. They vote in primaries. They canvass. They knock doors. They volunteer. That is a very difficult thing to go up against in a primary where generally voter engagement is low. voter turnout is low. The vast majority of people are not playing a part in a primary election. And so when you've got this really energized base who is backing a far left progressive candidate, they can very easily sway that primary. We've seen it happen. And so this is going to be something very interesting to keep an eye on in the coming weeks. I'll be bringing you details as they are relevant, as things come in right here on the Nick Craig Show. All right, that's going to do it for a Tuesday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app, and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy the day. We'll do it again tomorrow morning right here on the Nick Craig Show.